Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Major updates going on at Red Bull right now. It seems Franco Colapinto is nearly locked in to be joining the Red Bull family next year, but Red Bull disagree internally on what the plan actually is going to be. Apparently, Helmut Marko wants Franco Colapinto in the B team, in the junior team with Lawson getting promoted, whereas Christian Horner is keen to put Franco straight into the main seat alongside Max Verstappen. Will they win the bidding war though against Alpine? That's another interesting conversation which is currently ongoing. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into as always. Firstly, this I thought was pretty funny. Piastri turning up to Dilly Squat Farm here with, well, Clarkson and all the rest of the lot. There were some great pictures as a result of this going around, which I thought was pretty good. Of course, we know that Clarkson's pretty close with the Alpine team, supplies those guys with beers whenever they get a podium. And Piastri was on Alpine, maybe could still be on Alpine, of course. Made a rather better decision with his manager Mark Webber to go over to McLaren. And speaking of McLaren man, Bortoletto is going to Sauber, right? He's going to Sauber for next season for 2025. And it's going to be Audi full-time in 2026. There's lots of benefits to this. Whether, he's the man for the job, that is another question. But Brazilian driver, rookie, we're seeing this Behrman effect, I think some people are calling it. Behrman debuted for Ferrari in Saudi, did a surprisingly good job. I mean, he only had an hour of practice, goes and gets P11 in quali, P7 in the races. It's not like he scored a podium, but I think Behrman, especially on such a difficult track when his neck couldn't even cope with the G-forces, did a great job. And I think we've seen since then, teams have been more willing to give rookies a try. We've seen it with Colapinto this year, and we're going to talk more about the implications of that in a couple of minutes' time. Bortoletto, though, says that Sauber were thinking about delaying his debut till 2026. This is an interesting option to keep your eye on when it comes to the driver market decisions. Teams will prefer, if they can, to keep the same lineup between 25 and 26 just because there's so much happening going into 2026. Brand new engine regs, brand new chassis, aero regs, all this other stuff changes. So if you can at least keep the lineup the same, that takes some thought off your plate when it comes to going into a new season. So teams will prefer. It's not like teams won't make changes into 26. I think they will. But in Sauber's case, they'd prefer to say, okay, Bortoletto, you get this year, you get next year, and we go from there. Same, for example, with Ferrari and Hamilton. He's not joining in 26. He's joining now. He gets a year to maybe compete for the championship. And then, of course, 26 is when Ferrari will really look to kick on. Speaking of that whole relationship, the rumors that we saw yesterday, and I literally said to you guys, Italian press, take it with a pinch of salt. But apparently this isn't happening. So if you guys didn't see yesterday's video, Hamilton was meant to be staying, or well, it was rumored anyway, that Hamilton was going to be staying at Enzo Ferrari's house in Fiorano when he's around there, which only Schumacher in the recent times has been able to do as a driver. Apparently, though, that's not true. So that's what the race say anyway. So who really knows what's actually going on? The truth is, though, that Ferrari's first run with Hamilton will be in a 2022 car. So he cannot do anything in Abu Dhabi. There was rumours, of course, that he might do what Alonso did a couple of years ago, which is effectively drive a Ferrari in the post-season test. That would be a mega moment, obviously. That's not going to happen, though, because there's all sorts of end-of-year promotional stuff that Hamilton's got to do with Mercedes for his farewell, with, IWC, Petronas, all the other sponsors. So, he can't basically take part in that test because he's got to say his farewells to Mercedes partners, many of which joined because of him, let's be honest. So, that's happening, and therefore it means his first run in a Ferrari will happen in the following year in 2025, probably relatively early in the year. There's talks that it's going to be an F175, the 2022 beautiful Ferrari that he's going to be driving here. It actually is on screen. So, that is supposedly going to be Hamilton's first appearance in a Ferrari. And look, would Hamilton like to drive a Ferrari immediately in the Abu Dhabi tyre test? Probably yes. I mean, it'd be fire. And also, you guys know how it tends to work. If you ever do this stuff, they tend to rip all the sponsors off as well. So it would just be like a pure, that beautiful deep red F175 Ferrari with no sponsors on it, with Hamilton driving it around the Abu Dhabi track. Would have been a great moment, but that's not going to happen because he's got Mercedes stuff to still deal with. Now, more drama behind the scenes in F1. Can you believe it? I'm personally shocked this is happening. But look, we saw yesterday Niels Wittich, race director for Formula 1, has been fired. There's been some discussion on why. There's some sources that say Ben Sulayem fired him after basically questionable decision making over the last couple of rounds. There was initial reporting from the FIA themselves that Vitic had resigned because he wanted to explore new opportunities. And Vitic then said, "Oh, didn't resign? What are you talking about? You fired me." And look, did he deserve to go? Maybe. I mean, it's not like the steward did a great job this year and the race direction has not been good. But nonetheless, why are there so many mixed messages coming out of this? And that's the FIA, the governing body side. Doesn't mean that that's the only piece where the drama happens. We know that Ben Sulayem has been at war with multiple parties, such as F1's owner, basically Liberty Media. Now, their president and CEO, Greg Maffei, has been embroiled in some controversy, I think especially with regard to the Andretti entry when he made the statement, or at least supposedly made the statement, that he would basically have a personal vendetta against Michael Andretti and prevent him coming onto the grid at all costs. I think that's been one of the pieces of drama that he's been involved in. And obviously we know Liberty Media own the sport. They are trying to make as much money as they can from the sport. So they are pushing more races, more sprints, this type of stuff. And Maffei's definitely been to some degree a part of that. However, he's going to go. He's leaving his role by the end of the year. And I think there's even an interim individual, John Malone, who's taken over on an interim basis. So I don't know what's going on. What's happening here? Has he been fired? Has he resigned? What's going on? Usually, if you're a president and CEO, the board of directors, they decide if you stay or go, and it seems like they've decided that he's going to go. So, yeah, it's all going on right now. But as I said yesterday, Ben Sulayem, the president of the FIA, is one of the most unpopular men in the entire sport right now. He doesn't have the backing of the drivers, of the teams, and many of his employees as well. But he does seem to have the backing of the directors that actually make the decision as to who is the president of the FIA, and therefore he maintains the role. Maybe not so true for Maffei there from Formula One. So it's all going on. Of course, Liberty Media, Maffei were part of getting the Las Vegas Grand Prix happening, which is coming up in just a few days' time. It's interesting, though, to note that, the organisers are not interested in doing a sprint race, it seems, which is probably a good thing. I mean, you guys know, not a massive fan of sprint races, to be honest, and Las Vegas was exceeding expectations last year in terms of the actual Grand Prix. Whether they do a sprint as well, apparently the organisers are like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to have one race day a year, and that's going to be how it is. Now, let's talk about some drama elsewhere. Adrian Newey, former Red Bull man, he is obviously a critical piece in the rebuild that Aston Martin are trying to do, not just in terms of their car, but also in terms of the organisation that actually gets that car built. Dan Fallows is gone, resigns, fired, basically, full man for what happened at Aston Martin, in a similar way to Mike Elliott, maybe, over at Mercedes. Now, Mike Elliott, after he was gone from Mercedes, James Allison came back in. They looked better, but it's not like they've taken massive strides in the right direction. With Adrian Newey coming in, you would expect that to be the case for Aston Martin, given all the other things behind the scenes that are going in a positive direction for that team. But Newey, he wanted pretty much full control of the technical structure of the team, and Fred Vasseur could not give him that at Ferrari. Newey apparently said to Vasseur, hey, I'll join Ferrari, but you give me a veto on individuals in certain positions in the technical department. If I don't like someone, he's going to go rather than me. That type of thing. And fair enough, Newey's the most successful designer in the history of the sport. He's earned the right to be a little, maybe arrogant or whatever, about his own abilities. And of course, there's been rumours that Newey doesn't feel like his own kind of additions to the Red Bull project were properly recognised by Christian Horner and that team over the last couple of years. So Newey made it quite clear to Vasseur that, okay, this is what I want to build. And Vasseur couldn't give him that responsibility because it would effectively make Newey, deputy team principal or whatever. Right, Newey would have a lot of power in the organisation. And maybe that's for the best, you could argue, if you trust Newey to deliver the results. But obviously with Ferrari, given the politics around Ferrari and just the way that organisation is, Newey was never going to be granted that type of power. And Vasseur said no, and therefore Newey was given those opportunities. And Aston Martin, kind of in a similar way to that, Mercedes didn't offer Hamilton the ambassadorial relationship that he might have wanted, the 2+1 deal that he wanted. Ferrari did, so he went there. Similar story with Newey going to Aston Martin, but he's going to be a critical part, of course, of that rebuild. How competitive will Aston be next year? Because, of course, the season's basically started by the time Newey joins, so it's not like his influence is going to be massively noted on next year's car, unless, obviously, he has influence on the technical structure of the team going into next year, which may, therefore, have some influence on the way that car actually gets designed. But Ferrari are in a great spot. I think there is a good argument to say that the next team that wins the championship, the world championship for the constructors, could well be Ferrari. McLaren are probably going to win it this year. It's still possible as it stands for Ferrari, but Leclerc believes they're moving in the right direction. And to be honest, for Ferrari, had they not had that bad middle stint of the season, they would be constructors champions this year. Leclerc may even potentially have been the drivers' champion this year. If you look at only the street circuits this season, Leclerc is right there. I think Leclerc might even be winning the championship just on street circuits alone. But Red Bull's Max Verstappen is still getting the victory, and he will maintain the spot at Red Bull, obviously, for next season. The question is, who's his teammate going to be? Sergio Perez continues to maintain publicly, he ain't going anywhere. I ain't leaving, he tweeted out a while ago. He keeps saying to the media, I've got my confirmations, I'm staying, it doesn't matter. But look, the results speak for themselves at the end of the day. The fact that Max went from P17 to P1 in the same car that Checo went from, P12 to P11 or something, P13, P11, so all of that over a tricky Grand Prix was another nail in the coffin, one might argue. So the current theory goes that Red Bull, at least the men involved in the decisions, have kind of given up on Perez. He's obviously not delivering. Horner has been very clear, I think, in recent interviews that he doesn't back Perez in the way that he previously did. Instead of saying, oh, no, Checo's our man, you're not got to worry about that, he's saying, well, we've got to make decisions based on the results, and Checo's obviously in a bit of a lull right now, to say the very least, even that lull has been basically constant for the last 3 years. And Helmut Marko made the comment a couple of weeks ago that, yeah, he expects there to be a junior driver or a non-Perez, basically, in the Red Bull alongside Max next year. Now, the guys seem to disagree on who they want instead, and there were rumours that because Perez is bringing serious sponsorship dosh back into Red Bull, and this whole Kit Kat partnership with F1, who also sponsor Perez, Nestle, Kit Kat, they sponsor Perez, so there might be something there. Apparently, that is not enough, because the reality is Red Bull lose a lot of money losing the Constructors' Championship, and they're going to end up third this year, basically because of Perez. And, the money they lose for that, and also the prestige they lose for that, and, the sponsorships they lose for that by not being the best team in Formula One anymore, does add up, maybe more so than what Perez's sponsors provide. And it's also better for Max, I think, to have a more competitive teammate who actually can help him, because Max is basically a one-man army every single race as it stands. So, this is what the article goes on to say. We know that there was a bit of a power struggle, a lot of one, a few months ago. And the debate is whether, Lawson and Colapinto, who's going to win the battle. Now, the theory goes that Marko, after that whole Thai power versus, let's say, Austrian power battle earlier in the year, Horner getting backed by the Yavidya family over in Thailand, Marko more so aligning with the, Mateschitz side and Oliver Minzlaff's side, and Jos Verstappen's side, and Max Verstappen's side, really on the Austrian side. But anyway, Yavidya and the Thais, they own 51%. So they back Horner, they still do, and that means that Horner won the battle, as it were. Now, Marko's still there. We thought that he might be fired by Horner as revenge. That never quite happened, but it does seem like Horner still retains the power. So, Lawson versus Colapinto, what's going to happen here? And Colapinto's done a great job, for sure. The last couple of rounds, not as strong, but I think he's proven that he's a valuable asset, and I think for an organisation like Red Bull, if you are going to lose Perez, you bring Colapinto in, you bring maybe equally as much, probably not quite as much, but you bring a lot of interest from the Argentinian region, South America in general, and Colapinto's going to be, if he joins a team like Red Bull, going to be a serious star in Formula One, and has loads of sponsors in his own right as well. So there's no doubts that Colapinto's being considered. So is Lawson, right? He's done a good job in the RB so far. He's matched Tsunoda pretty much over the last couple of rounds. Yuki's never going to get the drive. And it seems that Marko wants Lawson in the Red Bull. He thinks Lawson's done enough. He thinks he's the man. I think as well Lawson is the type of personality that Marko really likes. He's got that little edge to him that Marko likes to find in his junior drivers, and I think ever since I've seen Lawson, like the way he conducts interviews, I'm like, yeah, he's one of Marko's type of guys, and Marko wants him in the main team. However, Marko would want to see Colapinto therefore in the RB alongside Yuki, but Horner apparently wants to see it the other way around. So Christian Horner is said to rate Franco Colapinto extremely highly, and therefore willing to put him immediately in a Red Bull seat. And this is quite interesting because Marko you know, he's had his misses over time, one of which was Nick De Vries, which I never really understood. But putting De Vries in the RB a couple of years ago now, Horner didn't agree with that. Marko eventually had to admit, yeah, okay, I did get that one wrong. So I wonder if Horner will say, you know what, Marko, I appreciate your input, but actually I make the decisions here now, and, you know, I think we're just going to do this. But it seems like both of the top men at Red Bull want Colapinto in the Red Bull family. The question is whether he's going to get straight into the Red Bull drive, which apparently Horner wants. And if Horner wants that, that is the more likely possibility as it stands with the way things work at Red Bull. Or the secondary option is he goes to RB. The other thing we've got to keep in mind, however, is that this isn't guaranteed. He may not leave Williams. He may be stuck at Williams under a contract, although that seems pretty unlikely just because Williams have their lineup set. They've got Albon and Sainz. They don't need Colapinto on the books, really. And they've done a masterclass putting him in the car and then selling him on. So I think they will be willing to sell him. There's no reason, I don't think, why they wouldn't, really, especially when we're talking $20 million, according to rumours, to get him out of that contract. But Alpine are throwing a spanner in the works. Like, they've come in and they want him as well, which is, it's confusing a little bit just because do Alpine really need him? I mean, where Alpine currently are, Red Bull are in greater need of a guy like Colapinto than Alpine are, just because Red Bull, like their junior program, hasn't really worked. They have some candidates, they have some decent drivers, but ever since Max, almost a decade ago, they've not really found anyone who is perfectly positioned to be the next Max, as it were, right? Like, you know, Tsunoda's pretty good. Lawson's pretty good. Maybe there's the likes of, what's his name, Lindblad, right, next up guy. And there's been a few other interesting characters that have come and gone in the Red Bull family, but like no one really quite at that level. So it's understandable that Red Bull might need to look outside of their pen, basically. And Colapinto looks like the perfect kind of target, especially given all the other things he brings to the sport outside of just the on-track performances. But Alpine, they're going to maybe bid Red Bull up, and that makes things kind of interesting as well. But it also increases the likelihood that he's going to get a drive. If you've got two teams, and technically three teams interested, both Red Bulls and then Alpine, it's pretty likely they're going to be able to come to some sort of deal here, right? And Colapinto's manager apparently has said, yeah, Williams, like, pretty certain that he is going to get a drive on the grid somewhere next season. I guess there's a question whether this is actually the best decision. We know that there's been some speculation, certainly from Juan Pablo Montoya, that actually Sainz is the man they should be going for. They should go to Williams and say, hey, we actually want Carlos Sainz. You can keep Colapinto and Albon as your pairing. We're going to make that work. Now, I imagine that would be more expensive. It may be more risky on some level for the internal dynamic over there at Red Bull. Of course, there's also the risk that Colapinto goes alongside Max and gets absolutely fried. But, you know, you've got to take these kind of risks sometimes, and some drivers it's going to work for, some drivers it isn't. But yeah, massively intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Thought this is kind of cool as well to see Max and Danny Rick back in business, playing some paddle, I guess it's paddle, I don't know, together yesterday. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.